speed restrictions, and this is sort of a key part of a track maintenance engineer's duties, determining when a speed restriction might be required. So if we go to the next slide, the route that I manage basically goes from Newbury in the east to just short of Coglow Junction in the west, and also from Warminster to Thingley Junction and up to near Bath Spa. So the main line Newbury to Langport is the higher speed one. The Warminster to Bath and Thingley is the lower speed one. And we've also got two quarry lines which go to the Watley Quarry and the Muirhead Quarry, which are two of the busiest quarries in the country and actually in Europe. So yeah, that's the section that I manage. Next slide. This next graph kind of is intended to display the volatility of speed restrictions and how frequently they're imposed, removed, changed, etc., etc. So some of the spikes you'll see on this graph are rises in speed restrictions because of either some a weather event or a kind of a testing event, something like that. So yeah, you can kind of see just how much it's changed, and this is a graph every week for 2 years, basically. Okay, so next, I believe, so what reasons are there we may need TSR? So they fall into 6 kind of categories. The first one is resources. So we may not be able to deliver a timely intervention on a particular issue. We may not be able to have the skills to predict and prevent such a situation, and so on and so forth. So we won't go through all of them, but so the first kind of grouping is resources. Next up is material. You can see the kind of subcategories there. And then environment, so we've mentioned weather, that particularly in this day and age plays a big part in when we might need speed restrictions to address risk. Plant and TRV, so for example, a lot of our monitoring equipment is run on trains nowadays. If those trains were ever to fail for some reason, then you would struggle to know the current situation of your infrastructure. So that's the sort of thing in that window, and also where we need plant for mechanical repair, like road railers or high output kit or whatever it's going to be. So next up, method of working. So lack of effective tools to manage and predict TSRs. We'll come on to that in a bit more detail when we go into the site by site side of things. We've got some quite interesting stuff on that. And finally, management. Okay. So this next slide is how we track it on Western Route. We have a monthly meeting where we all sit down and gather details, ensure that progress is happening, and hopefully the TSRs are then falling off. And just at the top of this slide, you can see the impact that this has on the business, both in terms of delay minutes and in terms of financial impact. So yeah, this slide is about that it, trying to explain that this is not just a hard engineering issues topic, there are also softer issues. So people may have a different understanding of what's in front of them. The pressures may be different for different people. We can, for example, misinterpret results, and all of this stuff kind of builds to hopefully explain that this is not just a kind of binary decision. It's good, it's not good. There's a lot more. There's a lot more involved. I think we'll probably skip past this slide if that's okay, Gary. This is just detail about removing speed, which is not really important for this. So now we're going to go into a series of slides about actual TSRs that we've had to impose or that we currently have imposed. So this first one is at a place called Bulls Bridge on the WEY ELR. We actually imposed it on both track IDs because of a number of wet beds. It was kind of throughout the whole mileage. So like it says there, the first bullet point, so it's very old componentry. It's sort of F27s from the 1970s. So done a fair bit of time. And interestingly, then we have a renewal planned in 2025. However, it seems it's not quite kind of got to that point. Were that a little bit sooner, then we probably would have avoided having to do this. Yeah, like it says, so numerous wet bed issues had developed. Is that the last point? No, there's one more. So, so on the route map where you could see the two quarries, those two quarries into Westbury, the access is constrained to Saturday night only. So we have to carry out all our maintenance activity in that Saturday night, which gives us quite a big problem in terms of aligning the resources to do some of this work. Yeah, and we actually went in to dig those wet beds over, I think, 6 weekends, and then we tamped it the weekend after that. So it was quite a punitive TSR, but some of the geometry problems, which you can see on the right-hand side here, were quite bad. So where this black line turns red on the top couple of graphics, that's where there are faults, so level 2 faults. So yeah, that's the first one. Oh, can we just flip back? Sorry. So where I've put the letter in the brackets on the title, that refers back to the original sort of description of what TSRs can be caused by. So but we won't go through that, but just for future, for reference, it's there. So that was an L. Right, so this next one is Willow Vale Long Timber Bridge. It's on one of the quarry lines. And if we just first off focus on the two pictures on the right-hand side, that is what it looked like when we imposed the TSR. You can see that the geometry doesn't look right. There's kind of a hump on the bridge, and the actual timber is kind of becoming indented with the base plates as the wood kind of degrades. The base plates are actually sinking into it. So those timbers were changed, and on the far left-hand side of the screen, you can see the timbers are new on that side, and interestingly, an arrangement was installed to laterally restrain the long timbers. You can see at the bottom of that image with a bolted arrangement between two metal plates. Now, what was happening was when a train was going over the bridge, it was moving vertically, and that was creating a force on that bolt, which it couldn't then withstand, and they were breaking. Subsequent to that, a second design has been made, which is the kind of bottom middle of this slide, and you can see the green and red on that drawing is providing a cleated system which will remove those bolts altogether, which have been breaking. So this is a different scenario. So it's because of a component breaking, and we can't really predict how that's going to transpire. So that was the reason this TSR remained on. So I think there are some bullet points, Garrett. Yep. So the renewal of the timbers in 2020. The timbers now have been tapered to remove that geometry issue. However, the track continued to move vertically, and the components started breaking. Yeah, and then so the walkways were actually installed over the components, which again made it difficult to even identify that they were breaking. So you can see that we've got a problem here that we certainly weren't happy with. Okay, so that was Willow Vale. So the third site is Fairwood Junction. This is again on the WEY, where it joins the WES, which is the Westbury Avoider line. 100-mile-an-hour piece of track, and you can see in the picture on the left-hand side that in the centre of that kind of S&C by the two yellow boxes, that the geometry has kind of gone down, and this is because the memory in that ironwork is now such that we can't bring that back, I don't think. The picture in the middle, we've attempted to dig out the ballast. We've also replaced the sleepers beneath that S&C because they were the soffit was becoming damaged from repetitive packing. And the one thing we have remaining to do is install the ironwork, and then hopefully remove the TSR. On the right-hand side, again, you can see the geometry. So you can see that we're verging on faults all the time here, and we are struggling to resolve those issues. This TSR is still in place, in fact. So yeah, all packing options have been used. And the last one is the multi-purpose stone blower, which we have planned in week 1. Yep, components have certainly been changed, and the ironwork is the last part. So that is Fairwood. Right, cyclic top. So the TSR we had at Wolfhall on the BHL in 69 Mile area was caused by cyclic top, which is when regular depressions in the rail allow freight trains suspension to get excited and increase risk of derailment. So the left-hand image is actually the site once it's been resolved. The right-hand graph is a predictive tool which is available to Network Rail now, called Insight. So our traditional methods of trying to predict cyclic top are a bit are not the best, let's say. So what this graph on the right-hand side attempts to do is give you more granular detail on what you're looking at, rather than just receiving information that you've got a fault. This allows you to predict where those faults might be arriving. So you can see on the far left-hand side of that graph, the peaks are starting to get close to the coloured lines, which indicate a fault. So, yep, cyclic top site. New components, including drainage. The sleepers are new, the rails new. We failed to see this one coming, so this is a different one again. The way to resolve it is fairly straightforward, but we didn't see it coming, so it's a different cause. And yeah, as it says there, so using Insight, I think, is how we will overcome this. Right, okay, number 5, so TSR at Crofton, just up the line from Wolfhall. So this is a ballast issue more than anything. So as it says there, new components were installed in 2008. The land to the north. So if you just look at the photo at the top of the slide, The railway is running from left to right. The land above the railway to the north is higher, so vertically higher. Then I think the next bullet point is about the canal. Yes, so the Kennet and Avon Canal is to the south, and there's no drainage on site. So basically the water kind of pools along the cess rail and brings up this sort of chalky substance, which is not conducive to maintaining good geometry. There's no drainage on site, which I think may be a factor in why this one keeps coming back. And on the bottom right, this image is showing our way of resolving this issue. So using road railers, we're able to dig the ballast out without having to take the track out. So it's less sort of, we can do this in midweek night possessions, so sort of 7-8 hour possessions rather than your weekend blockades. So that it allows us to stay on top of it, but it's not really helpful in the grand scheme of things. So that's Crofton. So Greenland Mill, this is a completely different scenario. This is one where we intended to do work to prevent ourselves from getting into this sort of situation. So on this river bridge, there are derailment containment rails, which prevented us taking the sleepers out. The sleepers had got into that poorer condition that we needed to replace them, which involved removing the derailment containment rails to change the sleepers. But if you would ever have a derailment in that scenario, then there is the risk that the train would fall into the river. So the TSR is to mitigate that. That's quite a simple one. Right, hopefully you can make this one out. So this is one at Jocks Bridge, again on the Weymouth line, 112 mile, 25 chain, 30 chain, so another 100 mile an hour section of track. On the right-hand image, you can kind of see that within that speed restriction, hopefully you can see that the rail alignment doesn't look quite right. It kind of goes in towards the left and then comes back to the right again. Now we see this happening at this site pretty much every year, and we don't really understand why, which is a bit of a conundrum. So we try to proactively plan on-track machines to put it back to where it needs to be. This happens pretty much every summer. So the left-hand image is an image from the tamping machine, which kind of lifts the track and puts it back to where it needs to be. You can see the lining, there's a kind of S shape on the lining, which was measured by the tamper and was then corrected. So yeah, so it presents with an alignment and top fault. Yeah, so we should talk a bit about the Bayfix system then. Basically, a Bayfix system is kind of a pyramid. I'm doing that with my hands at the moment. A pyramid that sits beneath the left-hand shoulder on that image and attempts to support the track. Now, I think it has probably stopped this from getting to this state quite as quickly, but hasn't prevented it. Like it says, every summer it returns. Every summer we're planning tampers to correct it. So yeah, bit of a mystery, this one.
Sure, we'll hear some ideas at the end.
Yeah, perfect. I hope so. So moving on to some rail issues then. The TSR we currently have on at Hawkeridge Junction is because of rail defects that have been detected by the ultrasonic test unit. You can see one on the bottom left there. We have numerous rail defects on this section of track from Hawkeridge up to near Bath, and well, Laycock is pretty close to the other one. So on that kind of Y section of track, it's lower speed, so the maximum speed in that section is 70 miles per hour. It's lower tonnage as well, so compared to the main line where we have about 80 million gross tons, 80, this has about 10 to 12 million gross tons. So the rail has lasted longer because of those reasons. Yeah, like it says, so approximately 53% of that rail is more than 40 years old. We have 23 defects as of a couple of weeks ago, and our ability to remove those defects would be about 3 or 4 per set of midweek nights. So to get through those 23 defects, it's going to take 23 divided by 4. So yeah, it's about a year's worth of work to get through, and that presumes that nothing else will come in the meantime. Right, how are we doing for time? Okay, not bad. So this next one is quite similar to the TSR at Jocks Bridge. It comes on in the summer months pretty regularly, year to year. You can perhaps see in the bottom left-hand picture that the fencing is kind of leaning to the cess. That is where this fault appears. Again, in the second picture, you can see, again, this site has another bay-fix kind of pyramid sat beneath the shoulder. And again, you can see the track kind of leaning out into that towards the cess. And again, our method of correcting it is using the tamper. And geometry-wise, what I've kind of crudely circled on that trace displays that the right-hand top, so the right-hand rail, is a nice straight line. The left top, the left-hand rail, has got a big S in it as it kind of sinks down towards the cess, and also the alignment. So it's kind of sinking in a kind of diagonal movement towards the cess. Yeah, alignment top, bay-fix system. And yeah, like it says, so tamping is the short-term fix, but another one I don't think we've fully got to the bottom of. Right, 2 more. So this one is a site at Kintbury. It is a unique site, that is for sure. So before there is a video in this slide, which we'll get on to watch in a minute, but what I will just say is when you're watching this, it is worth bearing in mind these are not voids. This is not the sleeper filling the gap beneath the sleeper. This is the ground moving. So let's just get to the bottom of the bullet points. So the track renewal is planned later next month, so rest assured. So we'll look at the video.
We're not going to get the sound because if I put the sound on,
That's fine. That's fine.
there is something in that, I promise.
Yeah, so that's not voiding. That's everything moving. So a solution has been built, which is in the bottom left corner of this slide. And what that describes is a scenario where we've got piles which are fixed into firmer ground beneath the track, and also a geo cell or geo web, which is going to hold the ballast so it doesn't kind of move too much. So fingers crossed that will work. Okay, and finally, TSR on the East Somerset line, so one of the quarry lines. it's a lot of wet beds. Basically, there are hundreds of wet beds on this line, which is why we've had a 20-mile-an-hour TSR for some years. The method of resolving this is going to be expensive, time-consuming, but yeah, that's what we've got. So yeah, not an awful lot more to say. Do you want to pull the bullet points up, Gary? Yeah, so the line, like it says, the first one there, so it goes from East Somerset Junction, which is near Witham Friary, near Bruton, and goes up to Cranmore, where there's a heritage railway, the East Somerset Railway. Like I said, there are a few hundred wet beds, and we do have immediate action limit faults recorded by the track recording fleet, which is why we're concerned about it. We wouldn't necessarily just be concerned because it looks ugly. We're concerned because of the impact that has.
Is it the speed that's the problem, or is it actually derailment risk that?
Well, ultimately it's derailment risk, because an immediate action fault is something you need to do right away, and you would hope to not have too many of them. So the geometry is recorded every 6 months by the TRV fleet, which is another contributory factor as to why we're not overly keen on this one. 6-month recording, then find an immediate action fault. I don't think that really makes sense. And is there any more? So 20 mile an hour for some years now. And that is it. So there's quite a lot of detail there. I imagine there might be some questions, which is fine. We'll go through them. But to conclude, so speed restrictions need to be placed out appropriately, as trains travelling too quickly through these sites is unsafe. So speed restrictions are to signify when assets are in distress, and as a result, a judgment is needed. That's kind of going back to the softer side of things. It's not all hard engineering. It takes some insight to actually determine if that is what you need. And similarly, when you're considering removing the speed restriction, you do need to assess it correctly, communicate correctly with what you're going to be left with. And I guess that last sentence about what would be thought if you take an alternative action is really key, because you do need to get it right. And that is it, I think.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dan. Gary, so a great presentation, very interesting. Do we have any questions online or in the room? If you could online, if you could raise your hands, and we'll come to you. In the room, also raise your hands, and we'll also come to you. So, Gary.
I had one about, if you don't mind, I'll go back to one of your,
sure.
The one where things are, that one.
Yeah.
What's really immediately jumps out at me there is that assets are moving down, appear to be moving down the embankment.
Yeah.
So there's two questions there. One, how do you know that it's not the ground that's moving rather than just the ballast and things that are in the ballast? And also, because obviously your focus is on the track, right?
Yeah.
But what about those assets? How do those assets moving then get dealt with, and who deals with those?
So when this sort of thing happens, when we have our TSR forum and we feel like this might be the scenario we're in, we involve the geotech team, for example, or the structures team if it was on a structure, and we ask for them to place monitoring, for example, on it, something like that. Because like you say, so what might not be that significant from an earthwork perspective might be significant from a track perspective, and kind of impressing on them that that's the case is key. This one, East Somerset, I think they are doing some earthwork, remedial work in next control period.
Right. Okay. And what about S&T? Because obviously they've got load cabinets that are potentially on the move as well. Do they get involved?
Not really, no. Yeah, don't know.
Okay. Interesting.
Just regarding number 10, is it just cheaper to keep the TSR and take the delay minutes than fix it? Is that sort of the business imperative there?
I mean, it might be. I think from where I'm sat as the person who's looking after the risk, I don't feel that comfortable with that sort of approach. I would far rather it be addressed, but I do, on the flip side, get that digging 600 wet beds is going to take a long time. So, I guess it's, delivering a good solution that's just going to resolve it. For 600 beds is not, in various locations, is difficult, but if we pick them off one by one, then we'll probably get there.
I suppose the other factor, because this is the link into a quarry. So,
correct.
So is the other factor that you consider how time sensitive that traffic is, like from when it leaves the quarry?
Yeah.
If it takes an extra 10 minutes to get to the connection into network rail infrastructure proper, does that matter? Is that something the quarry's ringing you up and saying, I want that speed restriction lifted because I'm.
They are, yeah. That does happen, but so it also comes back to sustainability. So where we might be able to get this track into a reasonable place to take the speed off. Looking at it, that's not going to last, is it? So, to me, I think we need to be able to go in and address some of those issues, and then when we take the speed off, we know it'll last, and that's kind of in the back of my mind that some of the people who are trying to make those sort of, can you take the speed off? No, I want the speed on because I know it's not sustainable.
Okay. We've got a question online from Rami. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Hello.
Hi, Rami.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask, it seems that all the defects appeared on the track is due to some geotechnical issues for the track structure and the track layers. Especially this one, which appeared each year, as the speaker said, in the summer, especially in the summer. Did you check any stresses appearing on the rail, especially for this sort of track breathing during the summer, especially, or you just impose or correct the site location and the site or the track movement with the tamping machines?
So I think I understand the question. So are you referring to the stress that's in the rail?
If there is any sort of residual stresses or any sort of movement for the track or the rails, especially during the summer, that imposing this usual defect, especially in summer?
Well, so the rail will have been stressed. We know that the track is fairly modern, and why it kind of gets to this situation every summer, almost to the month, I think is probably to do more with, we might be able.
Is it this one?
That one, yeah.
Yeah, that one.
So I wonder whether it might be something to do with the soil becoming dried out in the summer months, and that might lead to some shrinkage potentially. It is really apparent that it comes every August.
Play around there, isn't there?
Yeah. So it could be down to that. Yeah. It would be interesting to kind of cut away and look at all the structure of ballast as it's been tamped year after year. Has that kind of descended lower and lower into the embankment? I don't know.
Version of an icicle.
Yeah.
Do you use the GPR at all to look at it? Does that give you any insights around that?
Not particularly. No. So perhaps you can do those sampling tubes. I guess that might tell us a little bit more about So if the ballast was at a depth which we wouldn't anticipate, then that might tell us something, but not in maintenance. It might be something that asset management.
No, the ground penetration radar on the measurement drain.
Yeah.
That doesn't ever get used.
Not by maintenance,
Okay.
really. Not really.
Might be interesting to see.
Yeah, have a look at.
I've not got any more questions online, and if you want to raise your hand, is there any more questions on site?
I've got one comment and one question. First comment is for the Merehead Quarry Road. Is I know people said, well, does it matter if it only comes 10 minutes later onto the main line? Bear in mind that amongst other locations, those trains obviously run into Acton, where at least one of them split. They then run down through to Ardingly and Crawley, amongst other places, Crawley New Yard. So those trains then got to fight their way through, South London. So yes, 10 minutes can then be critical trying to get your path all the way through through the network. You can then also obviously affect your wagon cycles, and it can literally be that 10 minutes will save you a set of wagons. So that then becomes very expensive. If you've got an extra 20 wagons you've effectively got to buy for 10 minutes, that is expensive. The other thing I was going to say is with regards to the Witham Friary fault, is there any connection with what's happened at Hook?
Yeah, that's the one. Well, I mean, I don't know the Hook site very well, but what I do know about this one is, it has resolutions have been attempted. I don't know if that's the case with Hook, and I guess we're learning as we're doing these things, and that what we do in year one of CP7 will hopefully kind of improve things further.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I mean, obviously, is there a, how do I put it? Is there a trend line that it is over the last, say, 30, 40 years where this is getting more frequent, worse, even if it's only slightly? But is there basically a trend line that's showing that something is happening, which could be climate change? We don't know. I'm just saying it could be. But is there a trend line showing that something's going on? Because obviously what we don't want is for Hook to happen again, especially if the train's going over it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to dodge that question, I'm afraid. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else has anything to share about kind of trend lines with geotechnical style failures, but yeah, I'm not really an expert on that, I'm afraid.
No, I wasn't expecting you to be an expert. I was just thinking that possibly, that people had been saying, well, we have a problem, so let's see what trend there is to try and predict what we don't want to happen.
Do we actually have data in order to look at trends? How far back does our data go?
Well, we have data with regards what's happening with climate. I mean, this year was the hottest I think we've ever had in the UK. But in terms of geotechnical failures, I don't have that to hand.
Even in terms of geometry, do you have track geometry?
Yeah.
How far back does that go?
It goes back some years, yes. But there would also be the impact of changes in traffic and changes in maintenance, which you would. So it's not. I don't think it's a simple thing to analyse that. It's going to be quite difficult. But no, good question.
Thank you, Julian.
I've got a question. If that's
yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, come on, Andy. Do you want to turn off mute and?
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for the talk, Dan. It was really interesting. I've got a couple of points, if you like. So the first one is I think it's really important not to forget that one of the big effects that a temporary speed restriction has is it reduces the dynamic forces in the system. And because there's a square in the velocity, halving the speed has a big, a fourfold effect on reducing the forces. And my experience personally is that often makes the difference between absolutely struggling to try and keep something going and actually getting it back under control. And I think as an industry, we were a bit inclined to forget that now. The other point was that a lot of these slip sites, and that used to be my patch at one time, have been there for a very, very long time. One of the things I discovered is as we did less tamping, some of these which we were completely unaware of started to appear. So it's worth bearing that in mind. In that, in the past, we just masked it because we always just kept tamping it. So they do really require earthworks investigations. And certainly when I was at Swindon, I had an agreement where the earthworks people would fund a lot of my tamping that I was doing simply to keep the speed off. So they weren't redeemed high risk sites of a catastrophic failure, but they certainly stopped us running at full speed. And so that might be something else worth considering as well. Have a word with Mr. Bartlett and see if he can persuade somebody to cough up some money for your tamping.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so the one of the issues I perhaps have is that a lot of these problems materialise between the two quarries and Westbury, where the access is really constrained. And to me, my personal view, and yes, I'm just a maintainer, but my personal view is that railway wants to be bomb-proof because of the access constraints.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the point, is we need to look at, and that you've raised the point that, if you need a piece of railway that needs very high reliability, you cannot necessarily live with some underlying embankment issues and poor ballast conditions, which otherwise might be considered, acceptable from an engineering risk point of view, but they wouldn't be from a commercial risk point of view.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'll do one last call for questions. Shakes the heads in the room. So anyone else online that'd like to raise a hand? No. In which case, I'd like to say thank you very much to Dan. That was really interesting. And if we could all thank Dan in our usual manner, that would be great. And I look forward to seeing you, everyone, for the next section meeting on the 22nd of February.